Douglas TBD-1 Devastator. The Douglas TBD-1 Devastator was already way too outdated for torpedo attacks by 1942. It had entered service in 1937 as the U.S. Navy's first all-metal monoplane torpedo bomber, but carrying a Mark 13 torpedo, its cruising speed was only 128 knots, and its combat radius was barely over 200 miles. Midway exposed that weakness in the worst way possible. American torpedo squadrons lost 42 aircraft, 99 aircrew were killed, and only 3 men survived. The Devastator still dragged Japanese fighters down low. It also proved in one battle that its time was flat out done. Brewster F-2A3 Buffalo. The Brewster F-2A3 Buffalo hit 1942 carrying more dead weight than real value. It mattered in 1937 because it was the U.S. Navy's first monoplane fighter. By Midway, that milestone meant absolutely nothing. VMF-221 launched 20 Buffaloes and 7 Wildcats, 13 Buffaloes were listed missing, and 5 more were damaged beyond repair. Against Mitsubishi A6M0s, the F-2A3 had already lost the climb, agility, and edge a frontline fighter had to have. Its defenders still point to poor tactics and bad positioning. The record still says the aircraft had already fallen behind the war it was trying to fight. Douglas A-24 Banshee. The Douglas A-24 Banshee carried the dive bomber concept into the Pacific without bringing the survivability the Pacific demanded. On July 26, 1942, 7 A-24s attacked a Japanese convoy off Buna. 5 were shot down, a 6th was damaged so badly it never made it back to base, and only 1 aircraft survived the strike. The warning signs had already shown up in Java. 15 repaired. 24s arrived there on February 17, 1942, and accidents plus maintenance problems cut that down to 7 combat-ready aircraft almost right away. Crews then fought without armor, without self-sealing fuel tanks, and without fighter cover. Vought SB-2U3 Vindicator. The Vought SB-2U3 Vindicator was a transition aircraft forced to fight after the transition was already over. Its prototype first flew on January 4, 1936, and as the Navy's first monoplane scout bomber, it did mark real progress, about 45 miles per hour faster than the biplanes it replaced. Then the war blew right past it. Across all variants, only 169 were built. The final SB-2U3 added fuel and armor, gained weight, and lost performance. At Midway, Marine crews were left with an aircraft too fragile for steep dive bombing, which is how it ended up with the nickname Wind Indicator. Brewster SB-2A4 Buccaneer. The Brewster SB-2A4 Buccaneer was finished before combat ever got the chance to finish it. It was overweight, underpowered, and lacking maneuverability. For a carrier scout bomber, that combination already kills confidence fast. The harder fact is what never happened. The SB-2A never served in combat as an operational U.S. Navy aircraft in World War II. Some aircraft earned their bad reputation by getting shot down in public. The Buccaneer earned it by losing evaluations, comparisons, and relevance. Once better aircraft were available, nobody wanted to risk combat trying to save this one. Curtiss SO-3C1 Seamew. The Curtiss SO-3C1 Seamew was supposed to replace older shipboard float planes. It ended up giving the fleet a reason to keep those older float planes in service. The most accurate judgment on the type stayed simple. The SO-3C never worked out. Wartime Navy imagery shows Seamews operating alongside Vought, OS-2U Kingfishers, and fleet histories record older float planes returning to jobs the Curtiss design was supposed to take over. That is a quiet kind of failure, but it is still failure. A replacement aircraft is supposed to simplify the fleet. The Seamew complicated it, and crews kept trusting the older answer. Bell P-59B Airacomet. The Bell P-59B Airacomet opened the American jet age and still failed as a wartime fighter. It gave the U.S. Army Air Force's jet training, jet experience, and technical data that mattered later. It also never saw combat. Bell built only 50 production P-59A and P-59B aircraft, and the airplane's own numbers explain why. Maximum speed was 450 miles per hour, but the engines produced too little thrust for a heavy conventional airframe. That left the Airacomet in the worst possible spot. Historically important, operationally disappointing. The United States learned from it. The United States did not need it in combat. Fisher P-75A Eagle. The Fisher P-75A Eagle spent way too much of the war switching jobs. It began as an emergency interceptor, shifted toward long-range escort, and never did either mission well enough to survive. Flight tests in late 1943 showed unsatisfactory performance in the first two XP-75s. The shortcut behind the project, building a fighter from borrowed components to save time, had to be dropped. Then the war moved faster than the program. By fall 1944, the Army Air Forces already had the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt covering the real escort mission, so the order for 2,500 P-75As was canceled. Only 8 XP-75s and 6 P-75As were built. Consolidated B-32 Dominator. The Consolidated B-32 Dominator was built in case the B-29 failed. The B-29 did not fail, and that stripped away most of the B-32's reason to exist. The program was real, expensive, and industrially serious, but only 118 aircraft were produced. Only 15 flew combat missions, and the type served with just one bomber squadron before the war ended. Those numbers are tiny for a 4-engine strategic bomber. The B-32 reached combat late enough to become a footnote instead of a fix. It did not disappear because it was imaginary. It disappeared because timing turned a backup program into a marginal one. Consolidated TBY-2 Seawolf. The Consolidated TBY-2 Seawolf lost its place before it ever reached the fleet in useful numbers. Naval records state that Vought built the prototype. Consolidated built 180 production aircraft, and the Seawolf never served operationally. That pair of facts says almost everything. This was not another Devastator case where combat exposed an aging design. The TBY was beaten by delay, timing, and redundancy. By the time deliveries finally started moving, the Grumman Avenger had already locked down the torpedo bomber role across the Navy. American aircraft failures in World War II usually died in replacement, timing, and a system that moved on before the airplane could matter. German failures looked harsher, messier, and a whole lot closer to total collapse. So click into the next video and keep watching.